just to warn you, there's a sound at the start of today's show that's a bit uncomfortable, unworldly, unusual. It doesn't last long, though.
The Photo Walk.
Right, here we go. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Really weird thing that happened with the microphone then. We'll put it down to spiritualism.
It just happens to me all the time.
I don't know whether you heard that, but it went all squeaky for a second. And that was the start to an interview I recorded 2 Mondays ago. I'd chatted with my guest Shannon Taggart for 5 minutes or so prior to starting our recording. Then when I pressed record, I asked her if she was ready to go. We went to start, and then the recording desk just fell apart inexplicably. And it doesn't sound like it's the first time that that's happened to Shannon, does it? So what I'd like you to try and do at the start of today's show is suspend disbelief for a moment and explaining things away, and just try to join me on something I experienced when I was somewhere between the ages of 7 and 9, something like that. Maybe double digits just, but that sets up the tone for today. And I'm breaking, by the way, from the usual introductory music, tickling the ivories in the background, because I'm not sure that would have set the right tone. But here goes. As a child, I lived in a small town, pseudo-village really, with quite a tight community. Very, very different, I think, to how society's become, where the front door shuts and Netflix takes over all social duties. We, as children, we weren't exactly feral, but when we got home from school, whoever was in, and for me and all my friends really during the 70s, that was Mum, would tell us to go upstairs, change out your school uniform, put your grubbies on, and in whatever weather, would then kick us out the back door, figuratively of course, send us to our bikes with one simple rule: be back by 5 for tea. And so, like a scene from E.T., we'd cycle en masse wherever we wanted, in whatever direction, until we reached some kind of Truman Show end of the world wall, picking up new friends along the way. And in many ways, the friends that we made kind of set the tone, really, for who our parents then befriended, rather than the other way around, which I think it sort of is these days. Now, each weekend, our mums and dads, instead of binge-watching Breaking Bad, in the days there were only 3 television channels, in the UK anyway, would take it in turn to host parties. They'd all get together and laugh at jokes that just weren't funny, eat cheddar cheese and onion balls on sticks, and stand around drinking wine. The kids were generally allowed to witness this very middle-class debauchery until we disappeared upstairs to just hang out with each other and play. I don't know, with Lego or something, maybe hide and seek in the bigger houses. And at around 9 o'clock-ish, we'd be allocated beds and mattresses on the floor and asked to somehow go to sleep, until our parents came and woke us up sometime between midnight and 1 o'clock and took us home. And it was in one of those bigger houses that it happened. This house belonged to one of my posher friends' parents. It was a big old, well, not old place, a big youngish place at the time, modern looking, built maybe late 60s. Lots and lots of glass, lots and lots of slopey roofs, and backing onto the woods, which is an important part of the story that was considered, I guess, the Truman Show end of the world, out of bounds zone. It was a deep, dark woodland, very menacing, full of monsters. That was what we kind of told each other. Anyway, this house being so large, I got to sleep in my own room. Joy of joys, with a large window, an outside balcony backing onto the start of the woods. Now, I know what you're thinking. That alone is enough for a sensitive adult to get a bit twitchy about, but for a child, full of stories prior to the days YouTube debunked every last childhood mystery, I was, and I use the L word correctly for once, literally sat in bed with covers pulled right up to my face, staring at the door to the room, finding the smallest ounce of comfort I could possibly find in a slither of light coming through a gnarly, bobbly, slightly frosted, floor-to-ceiling, 1/2 metre wide thin window that were all the rage in late 1960s houses with lots of slopey roofs and lots of glass everywhere. All our doors were shut on account of ABBA and David Cassidy hits being played loudly on the stereogram downstairs, accompanied by the occasional guffawing and pop of another bottle of wine before the day's screw tops became the thing. So picture this, or hear this. I had the semi-muffled tones of that nice Mr. Cassidy singing Daydreamer. This room, 4 times the size of my own at home, and the sounds of trees at night outside the window, because the woods were that close to this large window. If I could add a storm in, I would, but then I'd just be making stuff up. Though I know the fog of childhood amnesia could play a part, I'm trying to remember the more vivid things I can from that night, truthfully. I'm slightly guessing at David Cassidy, bit of artistic license perhaps there, and this is when it happened. I think I fell into some kind of broken sleep, but I was woken up by something, not a noise, not the music, not the trees, but I know something woke me up. And I looked toward that bobbly glass, long, thin door window with the dimmed light from the landing just entering the room. And there it was, Dad's face. I didn't think till now to wonder where the rest of him was, but it was his face. Dad? I called. Dad? Is that you? Clear as day, even through bobbly glass, this, I'm sure, was Dad. No, there was no doubt, really. I thought maybe he was checking up on me, perhaps. So I got out of bed, all the time saying, Dad? Dad? Is that you? His face getting clearer and clearer as I got toward the door, which I opened, and then gone. He wasn't there. Nobody was. Honestly, within the space of a step and door opening, he'd gone from being completely there, vividly there, to completely gone. That was the most unexplained, spooky thing that ever happened to me. And I've never had it explained. So, can things really go bump in the night? Are there ghosts? Are there energies from other sides that really exist? And can you actually photograph them? Well, I have a guest this week who believes you can and has.
Today on the Photo Walk.
It's because this connects to the deepest questions that human beings have. Are there other dimensions? What happens after we die? There was a question, can you photograph ghosts? And people were open to what photography could show us. The last interview I did, the same thing happened as well. And he said, I've done 3,000 interviews and nothing like this has ever happened. One of the things that makes Ghostbusters so wonderful is that Dan is so knowledgeable about the history. The dialogue is really true to psychic study. So the word séance, it's a French word. And a lot of times when you hear it, you think of Victorian England parlor rooms, because it was, that's kind of the image that's conjured up in your mind. And so he just put forth his hand, his regular flesh hand, and it just seemed to me, with my perception, to skip into this gigantic hand.
That's Shannon Taggart, my guest on the show today. Welcome along as we make our photo walks together, a show where your letters and inspirational stories guide us along the path. Plus talking with special guests, of course, from around the world. I'll take a peek into that mailbag in a moment for a flavour of today's letters that we have. But before that, Thank you to those who believe in the podcast enough that you're now Patreon members or extra milers. And to MPB, who've been sponsoring this show for many years now. And a warning for those with dogs who react to doorbells. There is a doorbell coming up. A service I use for buying, selling and trading used camera gear is MPB. As a website platform, mpb.com is the place where I can safely buy, sell and trade quality used photo and video gear online. And online guarantees make this a place I feel safe to buy from, unlike some other marketplaces. Here's how it works. You go online to mpb.com and search for gear that you'd like to add to your kit bag. Or if you're selling gear you no longer need, click the button at the top of the website that says Start Selling and Trading and just follow the very easy instructions. From there, you print off a packing label, stick it on the box with all your gear in it. It's collected by a courier free of charge from your front door. And the best bit, MPB pays you for your camera gear within days. So join me in the hundreds of thousands of photographers every year in the US, Europe and the UK who know that MPB is the place to buy, sell, trade and create. Right, on the show today, Bob of the Desert is finding some strange coincidences in our show at 5,000 feet. Craig Wilson is making pictures in the Lake District. Niels de Kemp finds that aging has much to do with mastering this thing called photography. And Gavin Perry has some thoughts for those in our community who photograph colourblind. Plus, there's this month's one-word assignment set by David Wright. Right, shall we walk? Checklist out. Coffee, check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking boots, check. Have you got some spare film or an extra SD card or two? Yes, check. Some wipes to remove ectoplasm from your lens and a proton pack, just in case, which will mean more to those who know a certain film that deals with ghosts. Let's walk. Thank you for joining me on these walks each week. This podcast is a very special part of my week. It truly is an opportunity spending time with you. And I don't mean to sound like a tickety-tocker getting all smunchy over a blackberry muffin, but I genuinely mean that. And I'm not quite sure what's just happened, because I never like to tempt fate, weirdness or sudden showers of frogs. But going by the figures, the grown-up numbers you read when reaching out to advertisers, we've had more listeners join us since New Year from all corners of this wonderful world of photographers and walkers. So, thank you very much. And if you are one of our newer brethren, that doesn't sound right, no, going down the wrong road with that one, the wrong track. If you are one of our newest listeners, then please write to me with your thoughts about this thing that we do, photography. I'd love to hear from you. The email address for everyone is stories@photowalk.show. I always make some sketchbook pictures, as I call them, to remind me of where I've trod. Now this week I've taken out the Leica M3 with me, which has been loaned to me by my good friend Giles. And I'm taking this to India along with a digital camera. But 10 rolls, so there's a roll a day, 10 rolls of HP5, a Leica M3, and because it doesn't have a light meter, I've got my old Sekonic light meter, dusted it off from the studio, and I'm using that. And I'm going to make a photograph now. I don't know how I'm going to do this because it's manual focus, so it's going to be tricky. Holding the microphone, holding the camera, trying to focus. Right, light meter reading first. I've set to 250th, ISO 400 because that is the HP5 rating, and I'm going to press the light meter, and I've got 4.5 as an aperture. So because the Leica doesn't have a 4.5, I'm going to 5.6. And right, this is the tricky bit. How to focus and hold the mic at the same time. Actually, I think I can do it. Hold on. All fingers and thumbs here. This is probably going to be a terribly focused picture. There's no diopter on this Leica. I assume it looks like there's a thread you could possibly screw one into, but never mind. Here we go. And a satisfying click. Now, you won't get to see these this week because I am going to have to process them. Right, let's look the other way up the path. Similar light meter reading, actually. And here we go again. And wind on. There we go. It's a test roll of film, actually. I'm taking this to Giles's over the weekend. I'm going to process it, and hopefully there'll be some pictures on there. Before the first letter, and while I remember, the interview today with Shannon is in two parts. In part one, you get to know Shannon and her work investigating, writing about, and photographing this world of spiritualism. Then in part two, as I get to grips with her book SÉANCE a little more, I've recorded some studio featurettes that play out within part two. There's one bit about a man I've spent time with in the studio that we talk about. I've actually spent time with Uri Geller, which is a name some of you will know. And not my other listener, clearly, I know. I can see them looking at me, bedazzled. And then EVPs, which stands for Electronic Voice Phenomena, the unexplained sounds, the voices, the otherworldly noises that appear within recordings made on everything from humble dictaphones to professional sound recording kit. I thought I'd add some extra stories within the second part of the interview today. But also, of course, there are your letters. And we'll start today with Bob Demers, a.k.a. Bob of the Desert. Bob, how are the rattlers out there this morning? Quieter, I hope, and at least 200 feet away. Just sunbathing along the trail. Although it does sound like you've been on your travels rather than making friends with the jumping joys of a morning. Hello, Neil. I often break the monotony of air travel with an episode or two of the photo walk. Yesterday I was on one such flight and listening to episode 469 of the photo walk, the one with Jim Richardson. I was returning to Tucson from a video assignment in Chicago and Milwaukee in Wisconsin, and at about 1 hour and 24 minutes in, this is important by the way, at about 1 hour and 24 minutes into episode 469, on the final approach into Tucson, I peered out of the window, port side, in time to catch a view of I think it's Chiricahua, isn't it? Chiricahua Mountains and the town of Portal, nestled at the head of Cave Creek Canyon, which sounds amazing. My partner, Robin, and I spent a few days in Portal last fall. Portal is a designated dark sky community and home to many serious astronomers. As such, Portal has strict regulations governing light pollution. We hoped that Robin would see her first view of the Milky Way. She did indeed. And we spent a magical night, swaddled in our sleeping bags on our folding chairs, mesmerized by the silent spectacle. Do you remember what Jim Richardson was talking about at 1 hour and 24 minutes into episode 469? At the same time, I peered out of the aircraft window. Cue the Twilight Zone theme music. I don't know, Bob, but it sounds spooky enough to have earned its place in an episode called How to Photograph a Ghost. Is it something strange and mysterious? Let's find out.
Another one I would mention is the light pollution story that I did.
There's a quote of yours that I've noted down here. Perhaps 80% of the world, or put another way, 4 out of 5 of the children born today may never see the Milky Way again.
Yes, I have used that. It's not mine originally, but it really does get at the tragedy. Because almost everybody remembers the first time they saw the Milky Way, or they remember that they had fireflies, in the summer evenings when they grew up, and they don't anymore, and they wonder why. And now, of course, Milky Way pictures are, they're all over Instagram. But at that time, it was really tough to do. And 3 years later, the Nikon D3 had come along, and it could do ISO 6400. And they had the 14 to 24 millimeter f2.8 zoom that was really good at 14 millimeters. And with that, you could do a whole Milky Way picture.
See? Yes, cue the Twilight Zone theme music. Thank you, Bob of the Desert, for your letter. And I do like the spooky with a small s coincidence. Always great to hear from you. And I've also just popped your late homework for the colour red onto January's assignments page too, you'll be pleased to hear. A couple of quick-fire thoughts before I introduce my guest today, Shannon Taggart, who's photographically and historically, I think, fascinating. Thought one, hang on a minute. Hang on. Hold those thoughts. I want to get a picture of this, actually. Let's do a light meter reading. I've got something on the floor here. Oh, it's still it's F4 250th. I could do a reflective meter reading off this. Let's see what the difference is. Quite a lot, actually. I'm sticking with F4. Right. Again, I'm going to have to try and focus while I'm talking on the microphone. Focus, and there we go. Wind on. I've decided to wind on after every shot. I know that in the camera bag, that means you could accidentally, I suppose, the shutter could be pressed, but I don't think that's going to happen. Where were we? Yes, thoughts. Yes, first thought. I managed to catch the tail end of the BAFTA Awards on Sunday night on telly, and I heard something that I just wanted to share with you because I felt a real resonance in terms of photography. And the letters so often sent into this show about how photography gives us such a super chance to escape from the world, if only for a few moments, making pictures in nature or in the street or whatever, and how looking through the eyepiece can be a positive, otherworldly, and we seem to be talking a lot about that today, experience. So, yes, at the BAFTAs, presenting the final prize of the night was Star Wars hero Mark Hamill, who said the following words: "I just want to say, in troubling times, it is an honour to be like all of you in the business of escapism." And I just thought that was worth repeating, as that's how I really feel about this community that we're all a part of. I just want to say, in troubling times, it's an honour to be like all of you in the business of escapism. That's what photography is so often about, isn't it? And in terms of community, here's one of our wonderful photo walkers who sends some great pictures of where he's walking from time to time. Craig Wilson, who's he's in the lakes when he took these photographs, he was in the lakes anyway, in England land. Hello again, Neil. I thought I'd share a quick thought, and I wonder if this applies to anyone else. As over the last couple of years, my photography's completely changed. Since first picking up an old Canon DSLR and dragging myself out of bed to watch and capture the sunrises on my own, to what I do now, which is walking to the lakes, climbing to mountain tops and experiencing the great outdoors, I find it the most therapeutic activity through walking, and it makes me feel so much better about myself. I still take photographs on these walks, but the need to enjoy our beautiful countryside is the main driver now for all of our adventures. And just like your recent guest, Black Crag, that shows you that the picture's been waiting in the inbox for a little while, always ends at a proper English pub for a pint. Anyway, here's a few photos from a recent walk all the way around Derwent Water. Love the show, Neil. Many thanks, Craig Wilson. My friend Alex Lester, who was for a long time in the UK on a radio station called Radio 2, he would exchange love the show for love the shoe. A sort of British eccentricity, really, sort of funny nod to the sign-off so many of his letters would end with. Such a very small thing, but I always think of that when I repeat something that you've generously said, i.e. love the show, love the shoe. I think he ended up with people sending him lots of pictures of shoes, if my memory serves me. Anyway, Craig, your pictures are on the shoe page today. I love, in particular, that gnarly tree that you photographed. Oh, wonderful. Really is. Black and white appealed to my love of black and white as well. Right, to this week's guest then. Shannon Taggart is a photographer, an author, and visual storyteller whose work explores the intersection of art and history, and most importantly today, the unseen. For over 2 decades, she's immersed herself in this world of spiritualism, capturing the rituals through séances in a way that's both investigative and deeply atmospheric photographically. Her book, SÉANCE, is a very difficult book to get hold of now because it's been extremely popular. It's a chronicle of this journey that she's taken, offering this very intimate, this very honest, uncanny glimpse into traditions that have fascinated and bewildered people in equal measure, I'd say. So we learn about what's behind spiritualism today, which in places may surprise you. Shannon's work has been featured in Time, the New York Times Magazine, and National Geographic, and her photographic investigations continue to shape conversations about the supernatural, photography as evidence, and the power, simply, of belief. And for some reason, and I honestly mean this, I just got what we colloquially call the willies, if you pardon the phrase, just a moment ago. It's almost as if I was saying those words and somebody was watching from the trees. Come out, wherever you are. Anyway, 2 parts of my conversation today. I'll walk on briskly. 2 parts of my conversation today. Here comes the first with Shannon Taggart.
Shannon, spiritualism showed itself to you firstly as a teenager, when your cousin received a message from a medium that revealed details about her grandfather's death. And in 2001, while working as a photographer, you began taking pictures where that message was received. And we're going to talk a lot about that. There's a lot to unpick before I ask a raft of questions I seem to have been storing up to ask somebody like yourself for many years. And at the start of the show, I would have talked about the story that I told you about, where I thought I saw my father through a pane of glass. I was 8 or 9 or 10, something like that. I'd gone for a sleepover at a friend's house. All the adults were partying downstairs. All the kids had gone to sleep. And it was one of these very modern houses that had that kind of mottled type of glass next to the doors. And I thought I saw my dad's face. So I went towards the glass, ever closer. He was there, clear as day. It was my dad, even though it was through mottled glass. And when I got to the glass and looked round the door and said, "Hello, Dad," he wasn't there. That's not spiritualism, though, is it?
Well, I think it's all related. And, there's this very ancient idea of the doppelganger, or that we have a double self that can travel outside of the body. And so sightings such as that throughout history, you can find them, and they're usually considered a type of omen, or it's bad luck to see your doppelganger when somebody's alive.
Right.
So I don't know. There's a lot to unpack there, but the idea, the concept of the doppelganger, and in fact, like that ties to the idea of people being afraid of photography, or that, that photography can capture your soul. Because, this idea of the doppelganger, the uncanny, the soul was always seen as part of a shadow. Your shadow is in your soul. And so that it ties into superstitions about photography as well, this idea of, seeing your own double.
I would imagine a lot of photographers who listen to this show, and I've certainly experienced this myself, when and certain cultures are very uncomfortable about photography. Sometimes it can just be, as I found out in West Africa last year, that it wasn't because they thought you were stealing souls. It was more to do with not wanting to be portrayed in a certain way in other countries. Mm-hmm. But many cultures do have a problem with photography still, don't they?
Yeah, there's a great quote in the scholar Marina Warner. She wrote this great book called Phantasmagoria. And there's this quote about early in American history, when the view cameras came to photograph the indigenous Native American Indians. And the chief looked at the box and saw what was going on. And he said to his tribe, "He's got all of your shades inside of this box."
Right.
Again, this idea of that your shadow is part of yourself. It contains this, or the reflection contains the soul. So that's one. But yeah, we know through the history of photography, I actually think the history of documentary photography is quite subversive in many ways, and in ways that we don't discuss or acknowledge. But, this idea of like going to another culture and showing the truth of it through your perspective rather than actually knowing what's going on. So I think documentary photography can enforce stereotypes and also eradicate them. So it's complicated. And I understand myself, just as working a photographer, I'd be very wary about letting somebody else tell my story. So whether it's like a superstitious apprehension or whether it's a carefulness in how you're portrayed, I think it speaks to the overwhelming power of photography, broadly, whether we're talking metaphysics or just how you tell stories about the world.
I think it's a shame, actually, that in terms of the cultural mythology of photography, that it's been broken wide open. I mean, I actually quite enjoy these stories of how the boxes we carry hold mystique and mystery, but thanks to the international far-reaching language of a smartphone, that magic with a small m seems to be no longer.
Yeah, that is. I do think the ubiquity of images or the commonness of photography now lets us be distant from its true strangeness.
Yeah.
And it is highly strange, photography itself. And that's something I think about and try to address in my work.
So, spiritualism, what is it?
So spiritualism is an American-born religion that is based on a belief that death is not the end, it's just a transition, and that we as humans can remain in contact with spirits of the dead, that there's a spirit world that exists, that is out there, that we can maintain contact with. And it started in America in 1848. I mean, these are ancient ideas that are just reborn in America, in early America, and becomes this religion, spiritualism. And so, my book is called SÉANCE, and the word séance, we all know what a séance is when people sit in the dark and try to speak to spirits. But so the word séance, it's a French word. And a lot of times when you hear it, you think of Victorian England parlor rooms, because it was, that's kind of the image that's conjured up in your mind. Yeah. But the séance is an American invention. The first modern mediums were American young women, two young girls named Kate and Margaret Fox. And the story of spiritualism starts as a ghost story. There's a spirit of a murdered man who's buried beneath the home, and he starts knocking out messages to the young girls, and they start communicating back.
Two knocks for yes and one knock for no concept.
Yes, right. which is an extremely common trope throughout poltergeist stories or ghost stories, throughout many cultures. It's a very common aspect of this type of experience, is the knocking sounds. So, so I like to always combine the history of spiritualism with the history of photography, not only because of my, my love of photography, but also there is a lot of strange connections. And one being that where the first public seances were hosted in America, which was in Rochester, New York, happened literally on the same street as where the Kodak headquarters would soon stand. Right. It predates Kodak, but so you have the seance, the modern American mediumship, and photography being brought to the masses right in the same spot in the same radical city of Rochester, which was a hotbed of radicalism and progressive politics.
I'm surprised to hear it was, if you like, an American invention as such, because I think back to the whole idea of religion, or maybe the tributes or eulogies are more of a modern thing as well. This idea that he has not gone, he's just gone to another room, and whereas this idea of actually contacting them, I suppose wouldn't have come through the church anyway. Wouldn't have been something you would have expected your minister to have organised or ministered. Right.
No, it's kind of reborn, if you will. Yeah. Right. Yeah. In the absolute, and this is something I've been thinking about and am writing about now, but have not published on, is the fact that I've kind of danced around why there and what, because basically spiritualism happened in this area of upstate New York state, which is where I'm from. I'm from upstate New York, in this 20-mile radius of land where all the American religions were born. Mormonism, Seventh-day Adventism, which became Jehovah's Witness. The Shakers were there. Like, it was like this hotbed of, there's a lot of progressive movements and free love communities like the Oneida. And then there was also the women's rights movement happened right in this spot of land in upstate New York. And throughout, the scholar Jocelyn Godwin has written about this area. It's called the Burned Over District. And throughout history, it's a very strange moment in all of religious history, this kind of implosion of all this new religion. You know, when you think about it, that's right where they built the Erie Canal, which would attach America to the rest of the world and would become a superhighway of American capitalism. So you have this spiritual, like this new shamanism, this absolute like primal religion bursting forth right at the waters where like materialism, like absolute materialism is going to like take over the world, you know? So I find that contrast extremely interesting. It's also by Niagara Falls, which is where, you know, the whole world starts to become electrified. There's a lot of high strangeness with, you know, there's the Great Lakes. So there's a lot of metaphysical theories about water and how that carries things. But I mean, that's where the Burned Over District is, right where they ripped up the land and put in the Erie Canal. And so I just find that fascinating. But also, I must say, I grew up in upstate New York, and this history was not taught to us. You know, this is that's part of why I've become so fascinated, is a lot of this stuff has been written out of history, or, you know, kind of it's embarrassing history or it's uncomfortable history. And when you really find out that a lot of the greatest innovators and the smartest people and some of the most profoundly people who have affected culture in huge ways were absolutely enmeshed in spiritualism and in seances and all of that, in science, in art, in technology. And so, yeah, that's how I got really sucked in.
At the start of our chat, I talked about your cousin seeing her grandfather at a séance, or being contacted rather by her grandfather. And I wonder what from that experience particularly captured your imagination.
Yes. So I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which is in upstate New York, and it's an hour drive from a place called Lilydale, New York, which is the home to the world's largest spiritualist community. So in America, spiritualism was hugely popular. People were either excited or afraid that it would take over as being the country's actual religion. So there were communities and camps around, and Lilydale it remains the world's largest spiritualist community, and it's still there. And they have mediums in the summer. It kind of runs as like a presentation of spiritualism. You can go there, and they have message services outdoors where you go and you sit on a bench and people would call you out. A medium would stand at the front and call on people and give them short messages, just a demonstration of spiritualism. And so my cousin, when I was like 14 years old, she went. We were raised Catholic, and there's a lot of Catholics who are interested in spiritualism because, you know, we have the saints, and the saints, there's a lot of parallels between a saint and a medium. So my cousin just went to this message service in Lilydale anonymously, sat on a chair. A medium at front picked her out of the crowd and said, "Your grandfather's here, and he wants you to know that he choked to death, and that's really how he died." And she was like, "This woman is nuts. My one grandfather died of brain cancer. The other died of a heart attack. Like, I've got to get out of here. These people are crazy." And she went home and found her parents at the table and tried to laugh it off and say, "Oh my God, I went to Lilydale and they told me this crazy story that my grandfather choked to death." And my uncle, so my father's brother, said, "No, actually, that's true." So our shared grandfather, he did have brain cancer, but his actual cause of death was a choking incident, and that nobody really talked about it. And I mean, I remember it like being a very shocking moment. And I just thought, you know, my 14-year-old self, how could a total stranger know something like that had happened over 30 years prior. And she didn't know my cousin's name. And my cousin didn't even know that happened. So like, how could she have known that? It just seemed too strange.
So how then did you go from that 14-year, those early teens, to this becoming a photographic, well, almost genre? I'm not sure there is a genre that this falls under. It's all of its own.
Yeah. So what happened was around that same time, I also fell in love with the medium of photography. So I've been completely obsessed with photography since I started practicing in high school. And then I went to college to study photography. And I studied the history pretty fully. I went to a very serious photography school. It was like the photo mecca, right? In Rochester, New York, it's the Rochester Institute of Technology. Yes. There was biomedical photography, fashion, journalism, fine art. Like, it was a huge photo place. And I started working as a photographer. I was working in newspapers and I was doing public relations and I was shooting some magazine assignments. And I was kind of bored by a lot of my assignment work, and I always really wanted to do deep documentary work. So I thought, I remembered my cousin's message, and I thought, I'll go to this quirky little place and kind of make some pictures this summer about see if I can kind of do a short little photo essay. I wasn't looking to do something long-term at that time. I was just looking to do something a little deeper. And when I got there, and the Spiritualist taught me that there was this whole there's this thing called spirit photography, and there was this whole photographic exploration of this topic that I was not taught about in school. It was not in any of the it was totally written out of photo history. At that time, I started in 2001, and some of the earliest, scholarship that relooks at spirit photography starts in the mid to late 90s. Right. So I was shocked that there was this thing called spirit photography, and people were trying to photograph spirits, and they were photographing seances, and there were these absolutely just really intense pictures from the late 19th century, early 20th century of, women half dressed in seances with these fake limbs oozing out of them. And just so just compelling and disturbing in a way that I had never. They were just really powerful images. And also this idea that they were early on, there was a question, can you photograph ghosts? And people were open to what photography could show us because it was such a mysterious process. And there were court cases. Like the first spirit photographer was taken to court, and, he got off too he was acquitted because they couldn't prove that he was faking these images. And so just learning that there was this whacked out, completely bizarre photography history attached to spiritualism blew my mind, quite literally blew my mind. And so I, here I am now, 24 years later, still kind of dealing with this topic.
It is difficult to find people in this space, photographers in this space. We've been talking on the show for a while now about this subject, this topic. And I thought at the first, it must be easy to find somebody that would talk about this. But it isn't. There doesn't seem to be a lot of, maybe it was something that was done in the early 19th century, perhaps, but there's a huge gap now where photography I can't find many people in this space. You seem to be the name that appears more than any other.
Yeah, I'm kind of a threshold figure. So in my book, SÉANCE, there's a curator named Andreas Fischer, and he's one of the curators who really was a groundbreaking curator in the sense that he co-curated the first art world show of psychic photography, which is called The Perfect Medium, and it was shown at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 2005. But Andreas says, I am an anomaly because I was working as a photographic artist and I took on this topic, whereas, early on, all of those images were kind of made as proof, or they were meant to be scientific documentation, or trying to be testimony to metaphysical experience. And then now it's kind of this hokey, considered outside of any kind of serious pursuit of photography. So I'm kind of the first or not the first, but I'm a very rare figure because I'm crossing over between. So he writes about that in the essay, which, I didn't really even understand that about myself until I read his essay, because he says, my work, I try to photograph, like, for example, when I go to a séance room, I try to photograph the preparations and document the entire culture of spiritualism, as well as the act of trying to speak with spirits. And he said, that's highly unusual. And
on such an international scale as well.
Yeah, I also, too, I do a lot of research. There's a lot of, you would think that spirit photography is of the past, but it's not. There are practitioners using photography. Like, spiritualism has always been deeply tied to the mystery of technology and the mystery of disembodied communication. And I meet practitioners, mostly mediums, who are using video or audio or cameras, but they're not using it as an artist. They're using it as a way to articulate or give testimony to their experience. And a lot of it is very playful and interesting and has influenced my own art. For example, I would call today, the spirit photography of today, and I don't know if you've ever done a show about this, but the orb photography.
Yeah,
I'm
coming to the orb, yeah.
Orb photography, to me, it's sort of like the new Ouija, the new crop circle.
Yes.
The new spirit photography, all in one practice. And it's really fascinating, too. It's not, there's a lot to say about that.
Well, I'm going to save orbs for just a while. Have a whole section on orbs. I guess there's two kinds of skeptic here. Those that you'll meet through your photography in terms of your presence, and those who read your book, SÉANCE, and look at the pictures with perhaps an eyebrow raised. There'll be those who maybe think you're there to debunk the process, and then those who see pictures with their eyes but can't quite believe some of the fantastical moments. It makes for a very interesting book and project in that respect, doesn't it?
Yeah. What I tried to do for my project was kind of present a project that was for everybody and to leave all the conclusions up to the viewer. So I found that both skeptics and experiencers can enjoy the project. They just have a different take on what I'm doing. I consider the project as much about the photographic medium, the medium of photography, as much as it is about spiritualism.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a reflexive project. And I wanted the book to show all different types of photography. So there's like basic documentation, there's more journalistic images, and then there's my highly interpretive time exposures of mediums where I do longer exposures, and I started that by accident, just because when you're in a dark room séance, you absolutely have to do a long exposure, but I started having some really strange synchronicities. So I'm kind of questioning or playing with the edge of documentary photography. When you're documenting something real and you're doing it a long exposure, are you really doing documentary photography? Like, when I photograph a medium in trance, sometimes I've had synchronicities where, they'll have a second face right next to their face that everybody was seeing, but you couldn't see, and things like that. And so, in paranormal experiences, time becomes different. And so I thought, well, it's totally appropriate to manipulate time in very extreme ways while I'm documenting this. But also, when you photograph a runner, let's say you're photographing the Olympics, and those photographers are going to the littlest snippet of a second that they can get with their shutter and freezing motion in a way that our eyes would never see. And we consider that pure documentary. Like, oh, you're seeing the actual movement, but that is just as much of an abstraction of time as my long exposure. How do you define a moment? What is a moment?
I never thought of it that way.
So, it's kind of, we are abstracting time, and photography is an art that is based on light and time. And I can't think of two more mysterious elements to play with. So, I'm asking these questions. I don't have any answers, but I am asking these questions.
In terms of the technical side of doing this, you talked about long exposures, and you are in the dark, and it would be entirely inappropriate to walk in with a bank of strobes. So how does this work? How do you photograph what you're,
Well, I mean,
what you're
I
not
have
even knowing you
strobed.
might see.
Yeah. I mean, and actually, it's funny because some of the earliest strobe photography was done in SÉANCE.
Oh.
Or,
Okay.
lit. But they were allowed because they were so desperate to capture,
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't talk about ruining a mood with strobing strobing a séance. Usually that would have to be the end of the séance. They'd wait, in the old, back in the day, they would wait until the phenomena happened and then they'd strobe it and then that would be the end. But yeah, so I just kind of, I guess you would call it participant observation, meaning I'm not approaching it like an assignment photographer. I'm given a seat. I sit at my seat with my camera. I don't move. I obey all the rules of the séance. They'll alert me. A lot of times I have been directed by spirit guides, by mediums in trance. They will direct me on how to do the photographs, and I obey all of those terms.
Yeah.
It's very collaborative because these are extremely intimate situations, and the mediums are, you're seeing somebody, when we're working as a medium, you're often seeing them at their most, they're operating in a very intimate way, with their senses, with their mind, with their bodies. Like it's very collaborative in what I'm doing, and I'm not trying to do any type of an expose. There's a lot of, believe it or not, there's still to this day exposés going on in spiritualism and people sneaking in infrared cameras and trying to accuse people of fraud. And so I'm not really so interested in that. I'm interested in the possibility and the high strangeness and kind of the wonder of what's really going on. And why do these questions remain with us? These are questions that have never been answered about what is a ghost, or is there a ghost, or what happens to us after we die. I mean, these get to the deepest aspects of human experience.
How much have your beliefs changed?
Well, I think when I first went to Lilydale, my feeling was, I was shocked by, like, how could these totally normal, totally sane, I mean, these are people who have jobs in real life, or, people in Lilydale who are spiritualists, they're not, they're regular people in many ways besides their beliefs. And I thought, how could they be so out there with this or believe this stuff and still be sane? But I just had the feeling that I shouldn't be judgmental in any way, because I think these people understand something about life that I do not understand. And I've just had too many experiences to discount it all away. I mean, I couldn't understand it. Now I understand it a little bit more now that, when we go to sleep at night, we're in a completely different reality, right? So some people have described trance, or like even clairvoyant mediumship, as just accessing another type of consciousness to bring in another dimension. And one of the most interesting descriptions I've heard of trance is it's as if it's a controlled seizure. And I thought that was really fascinating, or a way to control the way that your mind has access to. I mean, we know if we take psychedelics that there's a whole other world that's right in front of us. And that is just using the chemistry of your body to see it. So I just started to think about everything different and be more open to it. But at the same time, I have had a lot of my experiences have spanned the gamut. I've had things I can't explain.
And Shannon Taggart returns. Ooh, no, Neil, stop it. If, by the way, you have a story, I'll probably appeal at the end as well, that is fitting in terms of what we're talking about today, please send them into stories@photowalk.show. I'd very much like to receive them. Actually, the second part, as I said before, has a sprinkling of featurettes today, some mid-chat studio interventions with a little ectoplasm thrown in for good measure. Remember back in the summer, we ran for a little while, again actually, because we'd run it, I think, a couple of years ago as well, a feature called Shutter Sync, where we all took a photograph at the same time as each other, driven by, me doing a countdown on the show. We sort of, through it, revealed where you're listening to the show as the synchronized countdown came to zero. Well, I have a picture that was sent in for that feature that was never featured at the time, and some thoughts from Netherlands land, which is where I'm making a 2 or 3 day stop actually over the summer this year on a mini Euro tour, which I'm very much looking forward to. This is from Niels de Kemp from Rotterdam, Cue the Song. An interesting metaphor piece about the stages of creativity, which I think is quite genius actually. Neil, says Niels, there's a great comparison to be made between growing up as a human being and maturing as a photographer. Let me briefly take you through some thoughts I've had about this. You start as a young child, learning to walk and to talk. As a photographer, you learn the basic camera controls and exposure, sort of the same perhaps, maybe, if you squint a bit. When you grow a bit older, you learn about rules and about interacting with other kids. You learn about the consequences of your actions. With photography, you learn about composition and about the work of other photographers. Then comes adolescence. You start to question everything you've learned and you want to break the rules. Funnily enough, in photographic terms, you think about experimenting, and, well, most of us will think we've got it all figured out. We go through a phase of long exposures, and multiple exposures, that sort of thing. Then comes maturity. You start building, making projects. You start thinking about the long run. You finally realise there's more than black and white, figuratively speaking. There's nuance. You're not so heavy on the clarity slider in Lightroom and Life anymore. You also start to appreciate others' work more. I think many photographers never really reach full maturity. What are you saying, Niels? I know it took me 10 full years of photography, and I feel like only now I'm starting to mature as a photographer. Most mature people say it's important to always remain a bit of a child in some way. And you never hear this from kids. If you're lucky enough to reach seniority, yes, that's right, seniority, you become somewhat of a master in life as well as your photography. You slow down because you know your craft and you become an inspiration, perhaps even a mentor to others. There's much more to this, but I'm intrigued by the metaphor. I think it also helps to ask yourself the question of where you are in this evolution. It might just help you get to the next phase. Niels, I think that's a very clever way to think of photography, the art or the craft as maturing as a creative, and in our case, photographers. And I think the speed thing is really important. You watch someone who really knows their way around photography, and gone is the running base to base thing. If you just, I've done it many times watching people that I either aspire to be, or have got great respect for, and they don't run around. It's a process where they're very much in control of everything going on, without breaking a sweat. So, thank you for that. I think that was quite an intriguing way to think about these stages of creativity. I'll pop your shutter sync for late last year on the show page. I know it's a bit late, but it'll be there on this week's, so we can see you. It's a Dutch selfie. We were talking earlier about gnarly trees, weren't we? That wonderful picture that Craig Wilson took. Right, I've got gnarliness in abundance here, and I'm going to do a picture of it. It's a tree that fell a long, long time ago, just off the path here. I'm walking at Brimpton this week. I haven't got Barney with me, actually. He's been a bit under the weather, actually. I think it's something he ate. Probably something he shouldn't have eaten. But he's okay. He went out for a walk earlier with me, and then I thought I'd pop out again to make my photo walk. Right, what have we got? 250th, 2.8. It's a bit dark in the woods here. Ooh. Don't start the spooky thing, Neil. 2.8. Right, 250th is the shutter speed I'm working at. Let's try and focus. And here we go. Chaos and gnarliness through the lens of a Leica M3. Wonderful. This must have, it's a 19, I think Giles said it's a 19, did he say 1953 or 1957 camera? So I'm I don't know where it's been. Somewhere in the world with history. I shall have to just make up a story. In a moment, some thoughts on a topic I hope, could inspire some further discussion, because it's something I can't believe we've not talked about this subject before. And in that 4.5% of the entire population of the world experience this, it's more common than you think. I suspect it might nudge a few comments to stories@photowalk.show. As I say, I hope it will anyway. First up, though, the one-word assignment. Here comes your challenge for this month. I'll tell you how you can take part in a moment. It's set by David Wright.
The Photo Walk assignment.
A one-word assignment. I am amazed that we have not had this word before.
I'm amazed too, because particularly with portraiture, I'm going to have to say eyes, because
eyes.
It's everything. I mean, that's the connection in the photograph. Obviously, people can take that a whole lot of different ways. The obvious way is, through the connection of eyes in a portrait. But let's see what people, what other roads people go down with that. I can't wait to see what people send in.
Well, when we talked for the interview, I remember you telling me the story about the black bear and the grabbing of the arm, and the fact that mum's beady eyes were looking you straight in the eyes. What did you feel, by the way, at that moment? I didn't ask you during the interview. I think abject horror might be one of them, because she had a bit of a hold on your arm at the time. Can you remember what you were feeling as you were looking into those steely eyes?
I think I'm an unusual individual in that, and I don't know if this is a good thing, but I think I have a coping mechanism that allows me to be in some very dangerous situations and actually be, I don't want to say disconnected from them, but keep a calm, and that's been everything from being in a war zone to being in many situations with wild animals. So surprisingly, I actually felt very calm during that moment, and time sort of slowed down.
Well, that's what the assignment is. It's all about the eyes, and it's been very much the currency of your work, hasn't it? Your photographic portraits in particular.
For me, it's like I've photographed people all around the world, and often people where I share no language with somebody, but it's all about the eyes and making a connection. Yeah. And it is that connection of the eyes and a smile, and suddenly, you've got that portrait. Yeah. So it is all about that, that eye-to-eye connection.
Best of luck then for the assignment this month. Send your pictures to stories@photowalk.show, stories@photowalk.show. If you can, resize your picture to 2,500 pixels wide. You are an absolute star. If you can't, don't worry, send it full res and I'll do the heavy lifting for you. No watermarks, no borders, but do include links to any social feeds, your website, your Flickr, Glass, Substack, or wherever we can enjoy more of your work. Also, send me any thoughts about the picture if you think that helps with the storytelling. All the pictures and stories will go on the assignments page, so please make sure it's original work. And some of the pictures will also feature on our Photo Walk Instagram, which helps get more eyes on your work and our community to grow. So I'll be sure to tag back to you, obviously, if you have an Instagram profile. Good luck. Can't wait to see what you have got for the assignment. Now, our Patreon members, or extra milers, as I call them, are the stars, or as you are the stars of the additional shows that we have, our extra mile shows that I record. The extra mile, if you haven't heard one, it's on our Patreon channel. You can get to it through on the website, that is, through the tab that's at the top, which says support the show, just up there on the right hand side. No, not there, that's on the left, right hand side. That's it, support the show. Click that and it takes you through to a page which explains all about the extra shows that we have. And last week's guest, Gavin Perry, from Down Under mentioned something to me after we'd stopped recording that I thought, ooh, this is interesting. So we turned the recorder back on, so we did, and recorded a few more moments of conversation, which I hope will be a conversation starter. Approximately 8% of men and 0.5% of women worldwide have some form of colour blindness, meaning roughly 4.5% of the global population experiences colour vision deficiency, as it's called, in some way. That equates to around 350 million people. And amongst that number, there has to be a considerable amount of visually creative people who've learned how to deal with this as a fact of day-to-day life, including photographers. And Gavin Perry, my guest on last week's Extra Mile, is one of those.
Gavin, I think this might be an interesting topic that other photographers will doubtless share. Being a colourblind photographer doesn't mean that necessarily you think, right, everything now is in black and white. That's not what it means, because you shoot in colour. I've seen lots of your work. It's predominantly colour work. So what does it mean to be and how do you work with being a colourblind photographer?
Yeah, good question. I think, and everybody's colorblind are slightly different. So for me, it's the shades of reds to browns or blues to greens. So often they can be blurred, and I don't really see as much color as you do. So sort of autumnal, for example, I've got a pair of sunglasses. If I put my sunglasses on, the colors pop. If I take my sunglasses off, it's all a bit sort of brownish and reddish. It doesn't really sort of pop as it does.
Are these particular special glasses that you would have for this condition, or?
No, there are actually glasses I've thought about, but no, they're just normal sunglasses, but I've purposely got them shaded in a certain way that it enhances, like a polarizer, I suppose. Okay. For me, if I look at my photographs now, I think what I gravitate to is I see light, shadow, patterns, frames, colors that really pop. It's those things that I observe, and then I gravitate to taking photographs off. So it doesn't, it's not a hindrance. It's just it just changes the way you see the world. You're looking for something slightly different. You're looking for different textures and the likes. But there's lots of people out there that are colorblind, and some are extreme and do tend to then go to black and white. I find processing in Lightroom often difficult, and they say you should walk away and come back. Well, I do that because I walk away and I come back and go, crikey, what on earth did I just do there? And I've just pushed it too far because my eyes aren't seeing it in the same way. So I tend to mute and flatten a lot of my photographs. I tend to sort of take some of the colour out of it.
The seasons obviously throw very differing colours at us as photographers. Is there a season that you particularly look forward to? And perhaps how do you deal with the post-processing?
I love autumn, and I don't see it. And when I photograph it and I look at my photos, I go, they're all right. They're not that exciting. Right. And it's because I'm not wearing I did wear my sunglasses while processing the photos. Maybe, I don't know. But they don't pop as much to me on when I'm doing the processing because of my color blindness. But it's 7 out of 10 men I believe is the statistic, are colorblind in some form.
Wow.
So, wow. But and actually, so Ted Forbes did a YouTube video on it only, I think it was last year, on a couple of books that people have created. They were colorblind photographers. One of his books that he mentioned was called Colorblind. It was a very interesting book.
I'll pop up links, and of course in the video library, a link to the film from Ted Forbes just mentioned. It's a really interesting topic, and I'd very much like to hear from you if you have some thoughts about this. And if you are colourblind in any way, shape or form, tell us how you deal with it. If you could write to me at stories@photowalk.show, stories@photowalk.show, I'd very much appreciate your thoughts. So to our second part of the conversation with Shannon Taggart today. I also want thoughts, by the way, on this topic, and pictures, including orbs, that you may feel adds to the conversation. There's bound to be some intriguing pictures to share there. In this half, as I've said before, some further thoughts on some of the things and people discussed, including a short feature on the work of Uri Geller. Is all as it seems? Or is it just an illusion? Cue the song. And we talked briefly as well in a break from the interview about the sounds that sound recorders pick up unexpectedly. The second part then of my chat today with Shannon Taggart.
Shannon, orbs. They're a very popular currency in photography where people think they may well have captured something unworldly. Of course, there are all sorts of lens factors that explain away orbs, aren't there? Or is it a case that we simply don't want to believe that a picture can feature an orb, and it isn't necessarily light behaving oddly?
Yeah, the orb stuff, I'm trying to work out a way of talking about it that makes sense to photographers right now. I've been working with a really wonderful orb photographer in Australia. And I found her on Instagram, and her pictures are just so beautiful and so cosmic and so otherworldly. And okay, people explain away orbs by saying it's just dust, it's just air particles in the world that we're seeing with digital cameras. Like, you're more apt to see them with a digital camera, especially the ones with the smaller sensors with where the flash is placed. Makes this, like, if you throw dust in the air or something, and then the flash is hitting it, and it's out of focus, it'll look like a circle. Or, if it's rain or, something in the air. And that, for orb photographers, all of that is pretty much beside the point, because orb photography is about your consciousness interacting with the physical world through your camera. So these orb photographers have a practice where they ask the orbs to do things or to appear in, it's called orb calling. When you see, you'll see somebody go out into like the black night, and they'll put out their hand and they'll ask the orb to appear right on their hand, or ask the orbs to fill up the frame. Or when you talk to somebody who like seriously practices orbs, that it's all about the interaction of their consciousness with these patterns that they're picking up with the photography. And so, what is the photographer's eye? But our consciousness, embedding itself, like me showing you something about reality that you wouldn't see otherwise, using my mind. So I feel like it is attached, orb photography is very much attached to the way you storytell with regular photography. It's just using this religious symbol of a light orb, which is an ancient symbol. I mean, the mandala, the halo, these light things. And also, a lot of times orb photographers will like zoom in on the orb and it'll show colors. And so, for example, with this woman in Australia, Liz, she's on Instagram as Amazing Orbs, and she is amazing. They're really beautiful pictures. I asked her, I said, well, if people say it's just dust or rain or these are anomalies with your camera, and she's like, but it's not. It's light and it's color. And it's when you look at the aesthetic result of her pictures, it is really overwhelming and very emotional and very striking and really beautiful. And maybe it's a metaphor, maybe it's an actual supernatural experience, but whatever it is, it's beautiful. And whatever the anomaly is has been transformed through her photographic process. And that's what I find fascinating.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to looking up her work now. There are many other events and things that you've traveled to. You're very intrigued by many of these spiritual events. I did spy a picture with Uri Geller in there, who is in the UK is known for his spoon bending. And actually, I've met Uri when I was presenting a radio show. He came in and he asked for some spoons from the kitchen, and then he essentially just bent and broke them with his mind. But it was fascinating to me, fascinating to watch him work, Because up to that point, I'd always thought, he's a bit of a joker, really, even though I'd seen him in my youth on big TV shows doing this, if you want to call it, act. I find that kind of thing, that inexplicable thing, that probably is all wrapped up in spiritualism as well, is it?
Yeah. Whether things, there's a lot of connection between stage magic and spiritualism.
Yeah.
Right?
And he would say he would always, he'd recoil in horror if you were to suggest that it's stage magic to him.
Right. Although he does call himself a mystifier. I'm actually quite jealous you got to see him do that in person in such like a intimate setting.
Yeah. Well, it was only about 3 or 4 of us with him.
Wow.
It was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say about Uri is that I don't know him very well, but I was on a show with him and he was so nice and so kind to me. And I gave him the book and he really liked it. And so he sent me a quote and he sent me a picture of himself with the book, which I was so thrilled about. But really, really, really lovely guy. And even if I email him a research question, he'll get back to me right away and be very forthcoming and like just a wonderful person, really. But yeah, he kind of popularized that whole metal bending thing. And I'm actually doing some research on that right now. Didn't he used to do this thing where if you had a broken clock in your house?
That's right. Yes.
He would get on television and there are people all over the world who claim that their clocks were he could start
them up.
Yes. So there's a lot of, he's just such a fascinating guy.
Yeah. I was rather upset and perturbed though while I was at this particular radio station. He supported a particular football club, and we needed to go up a division, and I think he came onto the pitch. My memory is probably not serving me right now, but I'm pretty sure he came onto the pitch at half-time and had the entire stadium trying to focus their beliefs for the result. It didn't quite work out, and I did think of that stage stick to spoon bending, but you are quite right. He's a generous character. He is fascinating and he does stuff that just can't be explained. Breaking from my chat with Shannon, just for one moment, let's investigate this enigmatic world of Uri Geller, the man who became a household name in the 70s with his spoon-bending antics and claims of psychic prowess. Uri Geller shot to fame by seemingly bending spoons with his mind during TV appearances. He also claimed to fix broken watches and clocks from afar, urging viewers to bring their timepieces close to the screen for a little remote TLC. Many folks were captivated, believing they were witnessing genuine psychic phenomena, and maybe they were. However, not everybody was convinced. Skeptics, especially magicians like James Randi, argued that Geller's feats were nothing more than clever illusions. James Randi even wrote a book, The Truth About Uri Geller, detailing how these tricks could be replicated using standard sleight of hand techniques. He demonstrated that with a bit of misdirection and practice, anybody could bend spoons or restart watches, no psychic powers needed. One of the most telling moments was Uri Geller's appearance on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Now, Carson, a former magician himself, set up controlled conditions to prevent any trickery. That evening, Uri Geller struggled to perform his usual feats, leading many to question the authenticity of his abilities.
Well, Uri, I don't want you to feel bad about this tonight. The monologue doesn't work every night either. And maybe
I don't feel bad about it. It happens to me not once, but it happens quite a lot when I cannot perform and do things.
Would you like to try it again some evening if you want to?
Yeah, I guess.
I'll be happy to extend an invitation to you.
You know, Johnny, just to finish that, this was quite an important appearance for me here tonight. And really in other places I felt real good and I knew I could perform things. Because maybe this was and is an important appearance for me tonight, I might be blocking myself. And I want to tell you, people ask me, are you nervous before coming in and sitting here? I was very nervous tonight, really. Maybe I can say my first time that I was really nervous appearing. I heard about you when I was a little kid in Israel. So
Well, look,
For me, it was important.
We'll love to have you come back again sometime.
Okay, thank you.
Really.
And don't be disappointed. I'm not.
Okay, fine. Ricardo, thank you. Tomorrow night,
Now, this is where my memory didn't quite serve me correctly. Yes, Uri Geller was involved with Reading FC in the 1990s, and he did make various claims about using his psychic abilities to help the club. The halftime chant that I think I remember perhaps wasn't so, but during his involvement, he did famously bury crystals under the pitch at Elm Park, Reading's old stadium, to bring the team good luck. He also claimed to have used his psychic energy to influence matches, including one against Manchester United in the FA Cup. I remember that match. I was there. We lost. Over the years, Uri Geller's assertions have ranged from the intriguing to the outlandish. He once suggested that his powers perhaps were bestowed upon him by extraterrestrials, and that he'd communicated with super-intelligent computers from outer space. These sensational claims have only added to the debate about his true abilities. In the end, whether you see Uri Geller as a gifted psychic or a master illusionist, there is no denying the impact he's had on popular culture. His performances have sparked discussions about the boundaries between reality and illusion, leaving us all to wonder where the magic truly lies and whether what we're seeing is actually the truth. SÉANCE. I want to staying with the book. I'm fascinated by the idea of séance, but I've never been. I'm equally disturbed by what I might see and what it might do to my overall belief system. I suppose I'm disturbed by this idea of séance also having an uncomfortable relationship with the occult, or have I got that wrong?
Yeah, the funny thing is that the modern spiritualists that I know, they really dislike the connotation of occult.
Yeah.
Because they believe that spiritualism is natural law. So they're putting it in under scientific rationalism. Like it's a part of the Enlightenment. It's just an aspect of the human that is just very natural, and that anybody could be a medium, and that everybody has access to these types of experiences. And what the distinction they draw, which is a true distinction, is that like a spiritualist seance is done for the purpose of bringing forth contact through the other side to prove that there remains a connection between life and death, and also to bring forth guidance and healing. And nothing's done in secret. That's part of the reason it's one of the only rituals. You know, if you think of a seance as a ritual, it's one that's always been open to cameras. It's always been open to, let's study this, show me what's happening. Like, it's where a cult practice is secretive and there's initiations, and a lot of times they're doing ritual to create real effects in the real world. So, you know, and I'm not discounting that or saying all of that is bad or evil or any, you know, it depends on the practitioner. It depends on what's going on. But spiritualists are not trying to change reality or shape it or bring forth their will or their ideas into. It's more about guidance and healing, and it's more passive. They're not directing the spirit world. They're just trying to make contact with the spirit world, where certain occult things are trying to bring forth spirits to do something for them in the world, if that makes sense.
It does, but returning to this idea that there are disturbing things that one might witness within it.
Yes.
I watched, there's some fascinating films featuring you. And one particular film you were talking about, a German séance. Now, you had a particular name for him, and it's escaping me, the skill that he has.
Physical medium?
Physical medium, that's right.
Yes.
And there was one particular part of the séance where he was dealing with ectoplasm, and I think something happened which surprised you. I think you said you're not really supposed to scream at one of these events, but you found yourself doing exactly that. Oh
yeah, so that was a different medium, but yes. So what you're talking about is I had this experience with a physical medium named Gordon Garforth, where, you know, before the seance, he said, the spirits will come and they'll use ectoplasm to change the shape of my hand.
Ah, now that's the English.
That's
Gordon's
the English guy.
An English guy, yes.
Yeah. So it was, I mean, and there's different distinctions of ectoplasm. You know, sometimes it's invisible, sometimes it's visible. And so I thought, okay, when he told me that, I thought, I'm probably not going to see that. Because a lot of times you'll go to seances and they'll say, you're going to see this or that. And people will see different things. So I really wasn't expecting much. And I sat in the front row of the seance, and Gordon, very nice man from the UK who, just fourth generation spiritualist. His wife is a fourth generation spiritualist, and, just seemed like totally normal grandparents, like nothing out of the ordinary. And so, but he sits in a trance under a red light, and he had a short sleeved shirt on. And his wife, Gaynor, at one point said, well, the spirits are now going to work with Gordon's hands. And so he just put forth his hand, his regular flesh hand. This was just in a room. It wasn't like a magic show scenario. It was just a room with a red light and a chair. And he put forth his hand and he just slowly moved it. And it just seemed to me, with my perception, to skip into this gigantic hand, this gigantic form. And then he just moved his hand back and it went away. And it was so shocking. I mean, to this day, it's one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in my entire life. And I screamed out in the seance, and you're really not supposed to do that. And then everybody else started making noise, and I'm thinking, did they see the big hand too? Or are they just screaming because I screamed? And I was convinced that when I saw what was on my camera, I was shooting digital at the time, so it was recorded to a card, that it would just be a normal size hand, and I would have hypnotically rendered it because I was suggested to me that I would see this hand. But no, in my picture, the hand was absolutely equally as terrifying and big and straight. Actually, to me, it looks like one of those big foam hands that you see at sports.
Yes, it does. I've seen the photo. Yeah, it does. It looks... Well, it's macabre and it's bizarre and comical almost at the same time.
Yes. And I took that photo to Lilydale, and the historian at Lilydale looked at the picture and he said, "Oh, Shannon, that's a glove. The man put on a glove, like you were fooled with the glove." And I said, "No, it wasn't a glove. It was not a glove. I swear to you, it was not a glove." But it looks like as if he has a prosthetic, but it really was his flesh hand. I know, you can watch David Copperfield literally take off his torso in some of his acts, so I'm not like immune to the idea that these are magic tricks, but I don't know how he did it. I have to say, in the seances that I've been into, and in spiritualism in general, everything is conducted in like a love and light type of intention. And although these, you are seeing these very dramatic, these ecstatic, it's like an ecstatic experience, and your perception has changed and you do see strange things. But only once I've ever been at a seance where it was a kind of like a class, and somebody came and they were taking turns sitting in this medium's cabinet, which is like this small little box where mediums sit. And there are stage magic shows that use mediums cabinets too, but spiritualists also use them. And anyway, this woman sat in the cabinet and she started kind of being kind of dark, and they just stopped her and said, "No, you have to get out. Like, no, we're not having that here." And but you hear stuff about Ouija boards, and spiritualists will say, they've kind of distanced themselves from Ouija. Ouija boards were a spiritualist invention, but they'll say, they'll bring lower energy spirits, or it's all about intention. All of these practices are about intention and using your spirit guides, and I don't know.
I suppose the darker side, there's the Hollywoodification, if there's such a word, of this, insofar as you watch things like Poltergeist and it still chills me with a young lady who turns around and says, "They're here," and there's of course voices coming out of the television. I suppose it doesn't make the job of a spiritualist any more easy.
Yeah, and I've asked mediums why, especially with the EVP stuff or the recording, some of that sounds really spooky.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard some of that, and kind of terrifying. And I've asked mediums, why is that? And it's like, because it's them saying, we're here. It has to be dramatic, like this concept.
So there is a showbiz element to it. Is that what you're saying?
No. They're saying the spirit world makes things very dramatic like that. That seems spooky in order to really get at your consciousness to say that they're here,
Shannon mentioned EVP a moment ago. EVP, or electronic voice phenomena, refers to unexplained voices or sounds that are believed to be captured on audio recordings but not heard at the time of recording. These phenomena are often associated with paranormal investigations, where researchers or enthusiasts or photographers use recording devices in an attempt to capture voices from spirits or other entities. Typically, an EVP session involves asking questions in a quiet space, leaving pauses for potential responses, and then analysing the playback for any anomalies. The results can be anything from faint whispers to distinct words or phrases that some interpret as messages from beyond. While skeptics argue that EVPs can be explained by radio interference, auditory pareidolia, which is the brain making sense of random noises, or equipment quirks, believers see them as compelling evidence of communication with the unseen. In the context of photography, particularly psychic or spirit photography, EVPs can add another layer to the experience, where the unseen isn't just captured visually, but also audibly, hinting at a world beyond what the camera can show. When I sat down to form some questions, and it wasn't difficult because I have so many, and I'm inviting you back to talk to us again without a doubt. I did think at all costs, I said to myself, avoid talking about Ghostbusters. I truly did say that. That was before I found out that Dan Aykroyd, who created Ghostbusters, wrote your foreword, and he is is he a fourth generation spiritualist himself? Yeah. Which I didn't know.
Yeah, no, he's also a lovely, lovely person as well. Yeah, Ghostbusters was inspired by his great-grandfather's SÉANCE diaries.
Yeah.
And one of the things that makes Ghostbusters so wonderful is that Dan is so knowledgeable about the history. The dialogue is really true to psychic study. And I love that it's such a great comedy, but it's also really resonates. And it was inspired by his great-grandfather, who was a spiritualist in Canada, who would come to Lilydale. In my book, Dan actually let me use the family's spirit photograph that was taken in Lilydale of his great-grandfather. And, his father wrote a great book called The History of Ghosts, kind of about their whole family history and the history of spiritualism. And he's really just so knowledgeable and interested in all of this stuff, genuinely interested.
See, now that makes so much more sense now, the film and the reason behind the film. If you had to choose one image from SÉANCE, I mean, it's a bit like saying, what's your favourite picture? So apologies for the crass question, but in terms of the material that you're dealing with, I am inclined to ask it. The one that has the most meaning for you, whether that's personal reasons or something that perhaps it represents.
Well, I do end the book with pictures of Gordon Garforth. So we have that hand picture, but then beyond that, and this is how I end the book. And so this is kind of, I have different favorites for different reasons, obviously. And there's like 150 of my pictures in the book, so it's really hard.
I know. So apologies for the question.
No, but I think for me, one of the most unexplainable images is how I end the book, which is, so Gordon, another time he had done kind of an impromptu trance session where we were, and there was no light. The only light in the room was a tiny security light, which was green. It was just impromptu, and we weren't prepared, and I wasn't prepared to photograph. So I just did really long exposures of him in this trance session. But he says, there's masks, my face will change. And that's part of his spirit guides. They use his face as they call it masking in spiritualism. So I took pictures, and in all of these pictures, he looked very different, very transformed. But again, these are long exposures, so we know what happens in a long exposure. I had taken a bunch of pictures, and he was looking at my laptop afterwards, and there was one picture that I actually wasn't even going to show him because it was too spooky. It looked like he had like a little mustache on, and it was just, and it almost looked like he was wearing glasses. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to show him this one because it disturbs me. And I was going through the pictures, and he actually ended up seeing that picture, and he pointed at it. He said, that one, that's the picture. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. I put a thumb drive in my computer. I gave him all the pictures on the thumb drive, including that picture. And I didn't think about that picture again. And then later, about 9 months later, I was back in England, and he invited me to his home. And when I got there, he said, I want to show you something. And he brought out this carte de visite of his great-grandfather. And it looked exactly like that spooky picture. He had a mustache and glasses. And I mean, it's undeniably strange and totally uncanny. And, you know, I don't know what to say about it other than that's how I ended my book, because I ended my book with that picture and then the picture of the carte de visite right next to it. So my book actually ends with a picture of a picture, which I like too, because it kind of amplifies the theme of photography.
See, this has been your photographic life. This has been your study. 2 decades worth of it as well. Traveling around the world, meeting the most fascinating people, both those going to séance and those holding séance. How does the story continue now? What's the next thing you need to tell about séance?
Well, believe it or not, I see séance as, you know, I thought when you make this massive 300-page book that you'd be done with the subject. But I have to say, I'm working on a trilogy. So my next book is about an archive. So I realized that a lot of this stuff gets thrown out and is discarded and is not taken seriously. And so I became very interested in the history of spirit photography. So I was also, because it's so obscure, I almost had to become a researcher myself. And so it's kind of a long story, and maybe for our next meeting, I'll talk more about this, but I saved an archive of 50 years of séance photography related to a very famous poet, the American poet John Neihardt, who wrote the book Black Elk Speaks. He started a séance group with some of his students, and it went on for 50 years, and they created audio, video, photographs, movies, notebooks. So I have their entire archive. I wrote a full history of the group, and I had a lot of strange experiences while working on this project, and it's all going to be compiled into a book. And so that'll be the second book. And then the third book I've already started shooting. It's kind of like revisiting and taking further the ideas of séance. So I'm simultaneously working on those last 2 books right now.
Well, yes, please, for the second interview to feature that. And then if you are travelling back and ever going to Arthur Findlay College, which is probably a conversation for the next one as well, then it would be lovely to meet up with you and actually watch you work and perhaps record you doing that. Do you attract more? I'm asking this I didn't plan to ask this, but just before we started recording our interview, something really weird. I understand now. It's going to sound like I'm making this up, but I went to fade my microphone up, and all I got. And do you know what? I'm going to do a screen capture, because that's the best way to do it, of the audio file, which went absolutely haywire as just before I started talking to you. Because do you remember I said to you, did you hear that? That was the weirdest. And Barney, my studio dog, went running off in the other direction. And the button that's supposed to stop the microphone feeding back to me, everything in here howled round. And I wonder whether you attract, and this, I don't want this to seem obtuse at all, but I wonder whether you attract weirdness now. Whether things channel themselves through you. I'm hoping that's not the clumsiest question I'll ever ask.
No, that's great. I mean, it is interesting to watch. And I have a very dear friend named Donna Sinclair Hogan, who's an EVP researcher, and she's going to love this story because, sometimes things do misbehave in ways that you can't explain. And the last interview I did, the same thing happened as well. And he said, I've done 3,000 interviews and nothing like this has ever happened. So
he had the same experience.
Yeah, but we were in SteamYard. We weren't in Zoom. And he said, I've done 3,000 of these. I don't know. Like, he couldn't, on his end, he was hearing something.
Yeah, it was strange. I honestly, it's just...
So I don't know what that means.
You're channeling something. I don't know whether I should be worried. We end with a why on this show whenever I talk to somebody. I truly believe yours will be an intriguing one. What is your why?
You know, that's something it's funny, I've been trying to come up with a succinct way to say that. And I guess it's because these questions, that I'm asking with this project and with my camera and with, all of these experiences, all these adventures I go on, it's because this connects to the deepest questions that human beings have, which is are there other dimensions? What happens after we die? What are my senses missing? What other senses do I have in my own body that I don't understand? How am I connected to other human beings in ways that aren't obvious? These are some of the most primal questions that we have as humans, and they've never been answered. So, I'm not arrogant enough to think that I'm going to answer them, but exploring them has been quite a journey.
And my sincere thanks today to Shannon Taggart. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. There's so much to the photography in this genre and to spiritualism that I just did not know. I found it fascinating, and it's certainly a topic that I'm going to investigate myself a little bit further. And that's it for today. If you like to walk a little bit further, then Extra Mile number 127 is waiting for you. It's the extra show for those who support this podcast through Patreon. You go the extra mile for me, so I go the extra mile for you. And the really special thing about this show is that you become a star of it. We find out about our wonderful community through my Shoot the Breeze chats with you about projects and ideas and inspiration. This week, extra miler Mark Christensen joins me, and we talk about a whole host of things, actually, including quitting work to become a photographer, and hands. Yes, hands. Why they can be an enduring subject matter for a personal project.
On this week's Extra Mile,
I would give anything to be able to go back and photograph my mom's hands because of the amount of work that represented in her hands and the thousands and thousands of meals that she made for our family, but also for other people. The way that she used her hands to work on the sails with my grandfather on his boat and build things. My mom and we would go to garage sales around our house, and our cabin up in Big Bear, and we would buy old broken down wood furniture, and then we would take it back, and she taught me how to use a drill and a saw and nails and screws and stain and paint, and we would rebuild this furniture. And so I learned a crazy amount from my mother. Her teaching me how to do photography, but also how to do woodworking and how to cook. Those are really the three staples, things that are the kind of the pillars of my life, if you want to look at it that way, of the things that I love to do. I love to do photography, and I love to do woodworking, and I love to cook.
There's much, I think, to inspire you on the Extra Mile this week. There really is. Our PS to the show is to come, but before that, we need a play-out song just to make some final frames to, or think about what's been said today. And it's from Bunker Buster. It's only a short number, just shy of 3 minutes. Although, considering the title of today's show, it's ironically entitled Life Goes On. You might have thought I almost planned that. And it's got a perfect whimsy feel, I think, to walk some more steps to. And there's a postscript to the show coming up straight after.
Every day we wake up, eyes still closed, and no one knows the things behind our shut eyelids, or where any of it leads. I was blind and hoping, now my eyes are open. None of what I see makes sense. My mind's a fence, but I'm still singing. Ooh la 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 la, life goes on, and I'm not done. When everything goes up in smoke, I loved you with the very heart you broke. There's combat in your voice when you are whispering in my ear. I hear you loud and clear, so filled with fear. The shoulda dones, the coulda beens, the woulda seen it coming. People, all of them are blind. Love's still hard to find. I'm singing, ooh la 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 la. Life goes on, and I'm not done. And everything goes up in smoke. I love you with the very heart you. Ooh la 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 la. Life goes on. Yeah, I'm not done. No, when everything goes up in smoke. I love you with the very heart you broke. The truth's as big a lie as any other thing we say. Lines as big a sin as any other thing we do. Sins are as good a pastime as staring at the moon with you. Ooh la 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 la. Life goes on, and I'm not done. No. Ooh la 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 la. Life goes on, and I'm not done. No. When everything goes up in smoke, I loved you with the very heart you. Ooh la 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 la. Life goes on, and I'm not done. No. When everything went up in smoke, I've loved you with the very heart you broke.
Wonderful. A song called Life Goes On. Right, let's do a final sketchbook image from the path today. 3 trees. I'll just call this 3 trees. 3 trees in a row. Okay. Ooh, very interesting. Rather large mushroom on the floor. I'll not be taking that home for lunch. Right. I've done a light meter reading, so I've cheated a bit. I'm just able to make the picture. So here we go. Okay. So what have I got? I'm still on f2.8, and ISO 400 is the rating of the film because it's HP5. 3 trees in a row, and there we go. Final sketchbook picture of the show today. Just a few closing thoughts before the PS. My sincere thanks to you. If you're about to become an extra miler, or you already are, of course, we'll keep building this wonderful community of kindness in the photographic and walking world together. If you'd like to join us in the extra mile, we'd love to have you and be a part of our growing community. Just go to the website, photowalk.show, top right-hand corner. My other listeners worked it up by now. There's an orange button. That's the one. Support the show. Bong. On that one, and you're through. My thanks to Neil Ford, who looks after IT, Andrea Gilpin, who's across Instagram, Kelly Mitchell, who looks after our Facebook members, and Michael Mixon for further research on the show. Right, a postscript for the show. Today it's from Minor White, who was an American photographer, a poet, an educator known for his deeply spiritual approach, actually, to photography, which is why I've chosen him. His work often explored the unseen, using photography as a means to express inner emotions, psychological states, and mystical experiences. I think that works very well today, and I am looking forward to your thoughts on the subject. He said, and I think this works for any kind of photography, but particularly the genre we've been talking about today, he said, one should not only photograph things for what they are, but for what else they are.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.